The most dangerous document a man will ever sign is the one someone hands him with a smile and tells him not to worry about. I have been handed a lot of documents in my life. Purchase agreements, deed transfers, partnership contracts, easement addendums, environmental compliance riders that ran 40 pages and contained, buried somewhere around page 31, a clause that would have exposed a municipal client to liability they never would have recovered from. I found that clause. I always found a clause because I read everything, every line, every footnote, every sentence that begins with notwithstanding the foregoing and ends with something you absolutely needed to know. That habit did not come from suspicion. It came from 41 years of working in municipal infrastructure planning, where a misread paragraph in a contract could mean a school district lost funding for 3 years or a bridge repair got deferred until someone got hurt. You learn to read slowly. You learn that the sentence someone tells you not to worry about is almost always the sentence that requires the most attention. I want you to understand that about me before anything else. Everything that follows makes considerably more sense when you do. My name is Gerald Ashworth. I am 69 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in a house I bought in 1987 for $94,500. The neighborhood was different then. Quieter, more modest, fewer renovated facades. The house is a 1962 ranch style, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, with a covered back porch that my father-in-law helped me build in 1993 using lumber he sourced himself and refused to let me pay for. He was that kind of man. The porch is still standing. So is the raised garden bed along the south fence that my wife Claire designed and planted the spring after we moved in. Claire passed 11 years ago. The garden is still there. I tend it every April and May, the same way she did, with the same cheap gardening gloves from the hardware store on Morse Road, the ones with the green rubber grips that never quite fit right, because they're sized for someone with larger hands than mine. I buy them anyway. It is not a grand gesture. It is just a thing I do. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to want to stay for this one. I retired from the Columbus City Planning Office at 64 after a career that produced no drama, no headlines, and no moments that would interest a screenwriter. I reviewed development proposals. I attended public comment sessions in church fellowship halls and school gymnasiums with folding chairs and bad acoustics. I approved drainage revisions. I flagged environmental compliance issues. I once spent 4 months blocking a proposed parking structure on Fifth Avenue because a developer's structural consultant had overlooked a load-bearing wall in a 1924 building that nobody had bothered to properly survey. The developer threatened to escalate to the city council. I brought my documentation. The building is still standing. The parking structure was never built. I consider that a good outcome, and I do not think about it very often, which is perhaps the truest measure of whether a man has done his job well. I drive a 2009 Chevrolet Silverado, white, with 211,000 miles on it, and a dent in the rear left quarter panel I have been meaning to address since approximately 2021. My neighbor Harold mentions it every few weeks. I tell him I will get to it. I will not get to it. The truck runs well, and the dent is cosmetic, and I have other things to tend to. After Claire died, I did 3 things. I updated my will. I established a revocable living trust with my attorney Patricia Huang, who had been handling my legal matters since 2007. And I spent approximately 6 months being the kind of quiet that people mistake for grief, when it is actually something more like recalibration. The process of understanding what your life is now, after 40 years of it being something else. I came through that. I have a routine. I have the garden and the porch and the truck, and Harold next door who talks too much and means well, and I have enough. My daughter's name is Renata Ashworth Pace. She is 43 years old. She lives in Dublin, Ohio, the suburb, not the country, in a house that costs considerably more than mine, with her husband Craig, who works in pharmaceutical sales and has the careful, agreeable manner of a man who has learned that agreeing is easier than the alternative. They have 2 children. Marcus is 11 and has recently become interested in structural engineering, which I find genuinely delightful. Lily is 8 and has opinions about everything, delivered with a confidence I recognize from her grandmother. They are good kids. Renata is smart. She has always been smart. I paid for 2 years of her undergraduate education, and she earned the remaining 2 on academic scholarship, which I was proud of in a specific way a father is proud when a child exceeds what you prepare them for. She practiced real estate law for 6 years at a mid-sized firm in Columbus before leaving to consult independently. She understands title structures. She understands deed transfers and tax implications and the full architecture of estate planning. She is, in the professional sense, well qualified to have a conversation about these topics. I want to be precise about that because it matters to what comes next. The conversation about the house began, as many consequential conversations do, with no particular fanfare. It was spring of 2023. Renata had been doing some consulting work on residential property transfers for a client base of older homeowners, people in their 60s and 70s thinking about how to move assets to the next generation with minimal friction. It was natural, I suppose, that she would start looking at her own family situation through the same lens. She mentioned it over the phone first, in April, briefly, just that she had been thinking about whether my current estate structure was as efficient as it could be. I said I was open to looking at it. I said I already had a trust and a will, but I was always willing to have a professional conversation. That word, efficient, began appearing with some regularity after that. In phone calls through May and June, at a Sunday dinner in late June, where Craig came along and ate quietly and agreed with everything his wife said, which is his default mode. In a text message Renata sent in mid-July, linking me to an article about stepped-up basis rules and property transfer tax implications. I read the article the same afternoon she sent it. It was accurate as far as it went. It was also strategically incomplete in ways that I found interesting, though I did not say that. I said, "Thanks, I'll take a look." I had already taken a look. She came to the house on a Saturday morning, August 12, 2023. She pulled up in her white Lexus RX at 9:28. I had coffee made, a full pot, dark roast, the kind Claire always said was too strong and I always said was exactly right. Renata sat at the kitchen table, and we talked for about 20 minutes about ordinary things. The kids' school schedules, a leaking flashing issue on her Dublin house, whether I was planning to get the Silverado's transmission inspected before winter. She had her mother's gift for making a conversation feel like it's going nowhere until it suddenly is somewhere, and I appreciated that about her even in this moment, because I recognized it. Then she reached into her bag and set a folder on the table. "I've been doing some work on this," she said, "and I think I found a structure that could save the estate a meaningful amount when the time comes." I said, "Tell me about it." She described it clearly and confidently, which I expected. The proposal was a quitclaim deed transfer, the house conveyed into her name immediately, with a retained life estate reserved for me, meaning I retained the legal right to occupy and use the property for the remainder of my life. Upon my death, the property would transfer directly to her without passing through probate. She explained that this would avoid estate administration costs. She explained that the retained life estate fully protected my right to remain in the home. She explained that from a tax standpoint, the structure had certain advantages related to how the property's basis would be calculated. She explained all of this in approximately 4 minutes, in the composed and authoritative tone of a person who has explained similar things to clients many times. Then she slid the folder across the table. "It's really just a formality," she said. "The house is coming to me eventually anyway. This just makes the transfer cleaner." I opened the folder. There were 14 pages. I read all 14 of them, including the 2 pages of boilerplate at the back that most people fold over without examining. I read the retained life estate clause. I read the section on the grantor's rights and limitations. I read the paragraph, small, near the bottom of page 9, that specified the conditions under which the life tenant's rights could be encumbered by the fee-simple owner's financial obligations. It took me 11 minutes. Renata refilled her coffee. She did not rush me. She sat at the other end of the table with her hands around her mug and waited with the patient expression of someone who has already concluded how the meeting will end. I closed the folder. I set both hands flat on top of it. I looked at her. "This is thoughtful," I said, I want Patricia to look at it before I do anything. She said, that makes sense. Honestly, though, Dad, it's pretty standard. She'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you. I said, probably, but I like to have Patricia look at things. She smiled at me across the table. It was a warm smile. It had her mother in it, which I noticed and filed away without comment. You trust me, don't you? She said. I said, of course I do. Something in me went very still when she said that. Not anger, not hurt in any conventional sense. Something colder and more precise. The specific kind of quiet that settles over me when I read every line of a document and identified every place where my interests and someone else's interests have been described as identical when they are not. I have felt that quiet before, across conference tables and in public comment sessions, and in one memorable conversation with a developer's attorney who smiled the whole time he was talking to me. I know what it means. It means, read more carefully, it means, do not sign anything today. I walked her to the front door at 11:22. I told her I appreciate her thinking about all of this. I told her I would call Patricia. She hugged me on the porch, the way she had since she was small, with both arms and briefly, and then she walked to her Lexus and drove back toward Dublin. I stood on the porch for a moment. The morning was warm and still. Harold was doing something in his driveway with a leaf blower, even though there were no leaves, because Harold operates on a schedule that is unrelated to actual conditions. I watched him for a moment. Then I went inside. I stood at the kitchen table. The folder was still there. I looked at it for about 30 seconds. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia's office and left a message with her assistant, asking if she could call me back when she had a few minutes. She called me the following Monday morning at 8:47. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Patricia Huang has been my attorney since 2007. She is 61 years old, originally from Taipei, has practiced estate and property law in Columbus for 32 years, and keeps a small jade plant on the corner of her desk that she has told me she has managed not to kill for 16 years, which she considers a professional accomplishment. She has a way of listening to a problem that communicates, without any drama, that she has already seen a dozen versions of it, and is simply waiting for you to reach the relevant detail. She is, without question, the most useful professional relationship I have maintained over the course of my adult life. I described the proposal to her over the phone. I described the document in specific terms. I read her the clause on page 9. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Gerald, she said, how did Renata characterize this to you? I said, a formality. There was a brief pause on her end. The particular kind of pause that is not uncertainty. It is a pause of a person deciding how directly to say what they are about to say. Can you come in Thursday? She said. I went in on Thursday, September 14th. I arrived at Patricia's office at 10 a.m. sharp. I brought the folder. I also brought my yellow legal pad, which I bring to every meeting where documents are on the table. It is a habit that people have occasionally found amusing. I find it useful because writing something down changes how you understand it. Patricia had done her own review in the days between my call and the meeting. She walked me through the document clause by clause, calmly and methodically, the way she does everything. She confirmed the elements I had already identified. Then she identified 2 additional considerations I had noticed but not fully parsed. The first involved property tax exemption eligibility. In Ohio, certain senior homeowner exemptions apply only to the property's legal owner. Under the proposed transfer, I would no longer be the legal owner. My eligibility for those exemptions would be affected. The second was more significant. Under Ohio's Medicaid asset transfer rules, a quitclaim deed transfer with a retained life estate can be treated as a disqualifying asset transfer if long-term care becomes necessary within a 5-year look-back period. If I needed nursing home or home health care in the next 5 years and applied for Medicaid assistance, this transfer could create a period of ineligibility. Renata knows this, Patricia said. She did not say it with accusation. She said it the way she says everything, precisely, without embellishment, because the facts are sufficient. I let that sit for a moment. Does the structure benefit me in any version? I asked. Patricia set her pen down on the legal pad in front of her. It benefits the estate marginally in one narrow scenario. If you were to pass within 3 years and the property had appreciated significantly. In every other scenario, the primary beneficiary of this structure is the person who receives the property. She paused. That is not the same thing as your estate. I said, No, it is not. What do you want to do? She said. I had been thinking about that question since the Monday morning phone call. I had thought about it on Tuesday while I replaced a section of weather stripping on the back door. I had thought about it on Wednesday while I drove out to the hardware store on Morse Road and stood in the garden supply aisle longer than I needed to. I had thought about it Thursday morning at 5:30 over coffee on the back porch while the neighborhood was still quiet, and the sky was a particular gray that comes before a clear day. What I wanted to do was not punish my daughter. What I wanted to do was not make a decision from anger, because decisions made from anger tend to be decisions you make twice, once in anger, and once again when you are calmer and trying to undo what you did. I have seen that happen enough times to know I do not want to participate in it. What I wanted to do was make a clear-eyed decision about what I had built over the course of my life and where it should go, based on accurate information and my own considered judgment. That is what estate planning is supposed to be. That is what mine had been, before my daughter came to my kitchen table with a folder and a warm smile and the word formality. I told Patricia to pull up the existing trust. We spent the next 2 hours going through it line by line. It was, as Patricia had structured it in 2018 and updated in 2021, sound. The transfer on death deed designation on the house was current and accurate. It accomplished exactly what Renata's proposed quitclaim was meant to accomplish. It would allow the house to pass outside of probate, without transferring ownership during my lifetime, and without any of the complications around tax exemptions or Medicaid look-back periods. There was nothing broken in my current structure. There was nothing that needed fixing. There was, however, something that needed revising. I had been thinking about this since Tuesday morning, since the weather stripping. It had clarified slowly, the way conclusions do when you give them the right amount of space. My existing trust distributed my estate in thirds, 1/3 to each of my 3 children. That is not how I structure it here for brevity. Renata is my only child. The full distribution was to Renata, with a specific educational carve-out for the grandchildren. What I decided to revise was the nature of Renata's share and the allocation of what had been a jointly managed brokerage account that Claire and I built together over 30 years. The account held $162,400 at the time of this meeting. It had been designated for Renata's inheritance outright. I asked Patricia to restructure it as a direct educational trust for Marcus and Lily, my grandchildren, independently administered by Patricia's office, disbursable for education, housing assistance in their first 5 years of independent living, and documented medical needs. I asked that the disbursement bypass Renata and Craig entirely. The children would receive it when they reached appropriate milestones, not as a punishment of their parents, as a direct expression of where I wanted that money to go. The house itself I left in the existing transfer on death structure. It will go to Renata. That was always the plan, and I saw no reason to change it. But I added a condition, a specific disbursement delay on any sale proceeds from property within the first 2 years following transfer with a required independent appraisal. It is not punitive. It is careful, which is the same thing in this context. I also revised the remainder of the estate's liquid assets, not dramatically. I redirected $43,000 toward a charitable remainder arrangement that would provide a modest income stream to a land conservation organization Claire had supported for the last decade of her life. She would have appreciated that. I do not think Renata will notice it enough to object. Patricia drafted the revised documents. They were ready by October 1st. I reviewed them on October 2nd, sitting in her conference room with a cup of coffee that went cold while I read, which is my consistent pattern. I had 2 small questions. Patricia answered both of them. I signed on October 3rd, 2023, at 10:30 in the morning. Her paralegal, a woman named Elena Marsh, who has worked with Patricia for 11 years and has a specific quiet competence of someone who has witnessed a great many important moments without ever making them about herself, was present. The notary was a man named Douglas Peel, who had a red thermos of coffee on the table beside him, and the unhurried demeanor of a person who has watched people sign consequential documents for a very long time and has learned that patience is the most professional thing you can offer them. I signed where Patricia indicated. I initialed where she indicated. I thanked Douglas for his time. The documents were filed with the appropriate offices that afternoon. I drove home in the Silverado. I stopped at the hardware store on Morse Road. I bought a new pair of gardening gloves, the same kind, green rubber grips, slightly too large, because mine had finally split at the left thumb after 2 seasons. I drove home. I made a pot of coffee I did not need. I sat on the back porch and looked at the garden for a while. I almost felt sorry for Renata. Almost. The call to Patricia's office came on October 23rd, 2023, at 2:14 in the afternoon. I know the time because Patricia texted me a brief note afterward. Your daughter called. 2:14, handled. She didn't elaborate because Patricia does not elaborate unnecessarily, and because the note told me everything I needed to know. Renata had called inquiring about the status of the quitclaim deed, specifically whether her father had reviewed it and whether it had been returned for processing. She had framed it as a routine administrative follow-up, the way you do when you're trying not to reveal how interested you are in the answer. Patricia told her, professionally and without editorializing, that she had reviewed the proposed document with her client, that she had advised against a transfer, and that Gerald had elected not to proceed. Renata asked whether there might be a modified version of the structure worth discussing. Patricia said that her client's estate planning was currently in good order and that no further changes were anticipated. There was approximately 30 seconds of silence on the line. I have thought about those 30 seconds a number of times. I do not know exactly what was happening in them. I know what 30 seconds of silence sounds like when a person is recalibrating. I have heard it in public comment sessions and across conference tables. It is a specific sound. It is the sound of someone who has run the numbers and found that the numbers have changed. Then Renata said carefully, "Can I ask what he signed instead?" Patricia said she was not able to share the details of her client's estate planning without his authorization. Another pause. Then, "Okay, thank you." She called me that evening at 6:31 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. She said she just wanted to check in, that she hoped everything was going well, that Marcus had a science project he was excited about and Lily had lost a tooth, that maybe they could do Sunday dinner sometime soon. Her voice was composed and warm and gave nothing away, which is a skill she has always had and which I have always respected even when, as in this moment, I was aware of exactly what was containing. I called her back the next morning at 9:15. I had finished my coffee and read the newspaper, an actual newspaper, the physical kind, which Harold also reads and which we occasionally swap on the front walk, which is perhaps our most productive interaction. I called Renata from the kitchen table, sitting in the same chair I had sat in when she slid the folder across to me. We talked for about 25 minutes. She asked how I was feeling. I said I was well. She mentioned the science project. I asked about it. She mentioned Lily's tooth. I said the tooth fairy rate had apparently increased significantly since her own childhood, which made her laugh, and her laugh sounded genuinely easy, which I was glad for. Toward the end of the conversation, she mentioned, carefully and almost as an aside, that she hoped my meeting with Patricia had been useful. I said it had been very useful. She said she was glad, that she just wanted to make sure I had good information. I said, I always appreciate good information. There was a small pause, and then she said that maybe they should talk more about the estate planning when I was ready, whenever I felt like it. I said, I thought my estate planning was in pretty good shape at this point. Another small pause. She said, Okay, Dad, good. I said, give Marcus my best on the science project. She said she would. We said goodbye. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and sat there for a moment in the quiet of the house, with the morning coming to a window over the sink the way it always does at that hour, long and low and pale yellow. Made a fresh pot of coffee, went out to the back porch, looked at the garden. I have not told Renata what I revised. I have not mentioned the educational trust or the charitable remainder arrangement or the disbursement conditions on the house. That information exists in the form of legal documents, properly filed and properly witnessed, and it will reach the people it needs to reach through the appropriate process at the appropriate time. That is how estate planning works. That is how it should work. What I will tell you is this. Renata is still my daughter. We have Sunday dinners 4 or 5 times a year now, usually at our house in Dublin, where Craig grills competently and the kids run around the backyard, and Marcus asks me questions about load-bearing structures that are better than most questions I fielded in 30 years of public comment sessions. Lily tells me her opinions about everything. I listen to all of them. I have strong opinions about most of them, but I generally keep them to myself because I am 69 years old, and I have learned that the best gift you can give an 8-year-old with opinions is someone who takes them seriously without argument. Renata and I are careful with each other now in a way we were not before August 12th, 2023. I do not think that is necessarily a bad thing. Careful is not the same as distant. Careful can mean, I know who you are and I know who I am, and we are going to navigate that honestly. That is not nothing. In my experience, that is actually quite a lot. The house is in good order. The garden is producing well this year. I put in 4 rows of tomatoes in late April, slightly closer together than is technically recommended, because it is my garden and I plant them as I like. The Silverado is running fine. The dent is still there. Harold mentioned it on Tuesday. My name is on this house. It has been on this house for 37 years. It will remain on this house for however many years I have left, and after that it will go where I directed it to go, through the process I designed on the timeline I set, witnessed by the people I chose. Not through a quitclaim deed transferred on a Saturday morning at a kitchen table over coffee that was still warm. Through documents I read every word of. Documents I signed on my own terms. Documents nobody handed me with a smile and told me not to worry about. That is the whole difference. And I consider to be everything. There is something my father told me when I was about 30 years old and believed I understood most of what there was to understand about how the world operates. He said, the man who reads every line will always have something to say to the man who didn't. I didn't fully appreciate it at the time. I thought I did, but I didn't. You have to be handed enough folders across enough tables before you understand what he meant. 41 years in municipal infrastructure planning. 37 years in this house. One Saturday morning in August. And a signature I did not put where my daughter expected it. If you have an older parent in your life, a father, a grandfather, anyone navigating decisions like this one, share the story with them. Not because every family has a Renata, but because every family has a folder. And the most important thing a person can do when one is set in front of them is slow down, read every line, and remember that a formality is only a formality to the person who benefits from you treating it as one. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you on the next one.